Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Sorry, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Netherlands. So I think we have few more people who are joining in, but yes, so I think till then, if all of us can start with the introduction in the chat, and I'll also just share a brief about this event that we are hosting today. So climate change, as we all know, is affecting young women and young girls disproportionately, and young feminists are also leading the way to change. So we have a young, diverse panel of activists who will also discuss strategies for building power inside formal decision-making spaces like COP and CSW, and from the outside through the vibrant youth activism of feminist movements. So instead of focusing on more blah, 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 so this was also in the words of Greta Thunberg, we look towards emergent strategies and aspirations of youth-led climate justice. So once again, thank you everyone for joining in. Do we want to maybe just take one more minute and have some introductions in the chat? I see that people have already started doing that. And then post this, we will just go into a very small group of breakout rooms where we will have a discussion around, just you all introducing yourselves, from which country you are, and then just discussing about the, the activism that you are engaged in, and one thing that you are really looking forward to from this session. All right, so my colleague Mufida is here to help us. So Mufida, do you think we can open the breakout rooms now?
Yes, sure. We will go into breakout rooms for around 7 minutes, and I will send you the questions in the chat.
Thank you. Yes, so Mufida will also share the questions in the chat, but I can also just, talk it through. So in those breakout rooms, we will just have an introduction about your own selves and talk about the kind of activism that all of you are engaged in, or the issues that you work on. So it'll be a safe space and, something where you all can just get to know each other a little more better. And then we'll come back to the main room and continue with our panel discussion. If anyone will need any support in their breakout rooms, you can press the icon for call for help, and someone from our team will join you there.
Yeah, so everyone is assigned to rooms. Just make sure to press join in order to join the rooms. Thank you. And as Purvi said, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask us.
Yeah, also in case any of you are facing trouble joining the breakout rooms, that also you can let us know. We'll try to figure that out. Mufida, I think some people have joined in now, so we can also assign them breakout rooms.
Yes, I am on it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So in case any one of you who have joined here right now, we are breaking into a small breakout room for 7 minutes. It will just be a discussion about, introducing yourselves and the activism that you're involved in, and what's your expectation from the session today. In case people here in the main room are finding it difficult to join their breakout room, what we can also do is, if you're comfortable here, this group can also have a discussion right here, right now. Or maybe if you think you're not able to hear us or something, so that also you can just maybe put it on chat. Hi, Katie, I think, are you wanting to say something?
Shit, I didn't want to get involved in all that.
All right. So in case any of you were not able to join in the breakout room, as and when you will find any time, you can also put about yourself in the chat box. And if you feel like, not a necessity, then also we can just get to know each of you a little better. Hello, welcome back everyone. I think people are joining back from their breakout rooms. So we'll give it a few more seconds. Hello, welcome back everyone. I think we'll just give it 43 more seconds because that's what I'm seeing. The breakout rooms have been given time. And then we'll just get to know like how the interaction was in the breakout rooms. But all those of you who are back, maybe do you want to share any insight? What was it? Was it good to get to know each other a little better, or did you find any similarities or same country people joining the event? Hello, welcome back everyone. I think everyone is back now. So great. Thank you so much. And I hope you had a good interaction, good getting to know each other in those sessions. Does anyone want to make, sorry, does anyone want to maybe share how the interaction was, or did you find any similarity in terms of any activism or same country, anything? Or the expectation from the session was same? Yes, Daniela, you want to share something?
Hello. So good. I mean, in here in the Philippines, it's already evening. So hi. We talk about a lot since this session should be all about to talk about something, to came up something about inequality and such, and against the blah blah blah. And we all agree that we are really looking forward with regards to what would be the conclusions and such of other different sectors in other different contexts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think there's some comments also in the chat about like, having a little more direction. So I think that will just also come in once we move ahead. We'll have some more discussions, which will also involve, all of you as well. But great, and thank you. If you'll have any thoughts, you can also write it in the chat box. So now that all of us are back, before we get into the panel discussion, I would actually request Mufida if you could share the Mentimeter link in the chat box once. So that will also be, just to understand what your advocacy and expectations are from, this session that we are currently having. So the Mentimeter will have few questions for you all to answer. And I see that the link has been shared here. So in case all of you can, maybe just fill those, and we can just see quick responses that are coming in. Let us know in case anyone's not able to access the Mentimeter link. All right, so I think we have some answers that are coming in. So the first question that focuses is that how do you visualize a youth-friendly space? I think that's really important. So some of them are saying we visualize it as a learning space, a refreshing space, a funny space. I think these are all words that can come from young people. And young people can also make that happen. Yes, in case anyone's not able to access the Mentimeter link, you can also type it in the chat box. So we have a response in the chat which says we also visualize it as a space where your voice is heard and taken seriously. Very important, yes. Wow, we have a lot of responses for this question. That how do you visualize a youth-friendly space? So that's again like, fresh perspective, safe to speak, safe to be in, interactive and objective, explanations of abbreviate, non-judgmental, a learning space, collaborative, accessible, inclusive, intersectional. Also, we have something in the chat, contemplative, involved in processes, youth are leading, respectful, horizontal, accepting, encouraging and uplifting. I think these are all really wonderful things that young people can really visualize for a youth friendly space. So that's really great, and thank you for sharing those. Yes.
I'm gonna go to the second.
Yes, yeah, Mufid. So this question is, do you feel young people are taken into consideration while making decisions? I think this is something that we all can really relate with and respond on that basis. Are people able to access and come to this part of the question? Maybe if you're not seeing this on your screen, you can just refresh it, because at times it gets stuck. Okay, so no one's seeing this question, Mufida.
Yeah, I clicked on the link and I went to this section. But I'm still in the chat, but the slide has not changed. I don't know why.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Basically, when we try to refresh the page, it's still asking about the first question. It's not moving on to the second question.
Okay. Maybe Mufida, do you want to refresh your link screen once? Or maybe till the time, yeah, maybe does that work for everyone right now?
Also, people can just click on their Menti, like they can click on next question. I think it's working now.
Okay, great. So we'll just give it 30 seconds for us to answer on this question. Thank you so much, everyone, for letting us know it's working now. But even if like someone's still not able to access, you can even put the response in the chat as well. But we have some answers here now. So like, I think as of now, majority are saying that sometimes young people are taken in consideration while making decisions. Some are saying no. So there's no upright yes, which is also understandable. Sometimes, but it's often tokenistic. So yes, we have some of those in the chat. Right. Okay. So yeah, so I think most people are saying that they feel like, sometimes young people are taken into consideration while making decisions, which is like definitely. So some people are also resonating with that in the chat box that, it's not always meaningful when they are also considered while making decisions. That's great. Maybe Mufida, do we, yes. What do you hope this session will achieve? I think this is an important question for all of us so that we are able to understand whether this session really is moving in that direction of achieving what all of us have joined here for. So we have a response which says that learning from others and build on our own networks. All right. Cross-pollination of ideas. Yes. One thing that I can see in the chat is how to enhance youth participation and safe spaces. So, okay, from this session, that's also one thing that people are expecting. Defining steps to move from blah, blah, blah into action. Wonderful. Identify some key concerns of younger women about what you want to see happen on climate change. And sorry, is that disaster risk reduction? Then I want to hear and listen to everyone's voices on what are the key issues and how we can work together to solve such issues. Yes, have some direct actions to bring back to our communities. Wonderful. Sharing best practices. I think we can still keep the link open, but for now, we can actually move on to the next session. But this link will be open, so if in case anyone wants to go back and still fill up what they would want to achieve from this session, what they are hoping that this session will help achieve. So you can go back and type it down there. But thank you so much, everyone, for participating in this. So how are all of us feeling? Are we feeling energized? Are we feeling, yes, there's some discussion that's going to happen? So because we're about to start with our panel discussion, and we have some very brilliant panelists with us. So before I introduce them to all of you, I just want to understand that how are all of you feeling? Maybe you can use any emoticon you feel like to just show that, you're feeling motivated. Some people are like we see it in the chat box. Are you feeling this celebratory? Great. All right. So I think, yes, so people are excited about and, excited to also know who the panelists are, which you might have gone through while you were registering. But just for everyone to know, who these brilliant young panelists are with us today. So I will introduce each one of them in brief, and then we'll also have a really nice, discussion so that we are also able to understand what their thoughts are around, climate activism. So our first panelist that we have is Poonam Ghimire. She is a graduate of Forest Sciences and the Next Generation Fellow 2021, alumni at the United Nations Foundation, and has also been an advocate in Nepal for equal education for girls and climate change since she was 11 years old. The next panelist that we have is Marinel Ubaldo, who is an advocate for climate justice and the environment. She's also a registered social worker and one of the founders of the Youth Leaders for Environmental Action Federation, a youth-led organization that is based in Eastern Visayas. The third panelist that we have is Ligia Decifan, who is a master in adolescent health from University of Pernambuco, Brazil, licensed in psychology from the UNAH, and is also an experienced person in women's, girls, and adolescents' rights, prevention of violence against women, and attention to attention to victims, survivors of gender-based violence. And the fourth panelist that we have is Rohinita Babire, who is also the co-founder at Girls for Climate Action, a movement that is putting young women and girls at the forefront of climate action. She serves as the Youth Action Coalition leader under Generation Equality on Feminist Action for Climate Justice. So we have some very, very brilliant and amazing young panelists with us. And So for us to kickstart on the discussion, I have this one question for all of you, which I would actually want that we could have a good discussion around. So my question to all of you is that why is climate justice a feminist, sexual rights, and education issue? And can you share how you approach this in your advocacy? So maybe just to get it kick started, can I request if Gunita, you could start or share your thoughts around this?
Thank you so much. Happy to be here. Again, my name is Janita. So my first take is to understand climate justice itself. So as we advocate for climate justice, we are linking it to human rights, safeguarding the rights of the most vulnerable, to have fair and equitable share of the burdens. So over time, climate change has been addressed mainly with very technical, political, and economic solutions, which I can say are not necessarily bad in my opinion, but this gives us a rigid approach. This kind of approach leaves out the depth of the issue in assessing the intersectionality between climate change and gender that clearly speaks to the vulnerability of many countries and groups to the impact of climate change. So we see mainly adults and girls, women in marginalized communities suffering more during climate extremes when they can no longer access schools, health facilities due to the long distances that most times expose girls mainly to the perpetrators, school dropouts, early marriages, teenage pregnancies, gender-based violence. And this also gives us the picture of how climate change disproportionately affects the girls and limits on their full potential. So they can't really explore their full potential because of these effects. So when we ask for climate justice, we want to see the voices, needs, and solutions and lived realities of women and girls put at the center. So you see, it is vivid that now more than ever, we need to invest in building resilience of girls, women, because gender equality concerns should be integrated into negotiations and ensure that new policies do not disadvantage poor women and girls, but rather deliver some benefits. So that is what we are doing at Girls for Climate Action. As we advocate for climate justice, we are putting these young women at the forefront. We are putting their lived realities at the forefront, and we want to center them in adaptation, mitigation policies. Of course, sometimes there are no chairs on these big tables, but what we do, we are trying to train them, empower them so that they can bring a chair at a table where there is no access for them. We are trying to see that they are trained well in climate policies, lobbying, advocacy, and their voices really matter when they get into these spaces. So this is what we are doing, and that is how we are engaging women, girls in the climate agenda and advocating for climate justice. The journey is not easy, but we keep holding the vision and trusting the process. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe like Poonam, would you like to share?
Yeah, thank you so much. Now moving to the question, climate justice is a feminist issue because climate change disproportionately affects women and girls. 70% of people living in poverty worldwide are women. 80% of people displaced by climate crisis are women. 70% of agricultural labor and water-related household chores are performed by women. But unfortunately, with the current trend of climate crisis, at least 12.5 million girls will not be able to complete their education each year. So in all ways, from social, economic to political realms of our society, women and girls are mostly impacted by effects of climate change, but very less represented during decision-making processes. For example, if there is a drought due to climate change, the people who have to go far away to fetch water are usually women and girls due to the current gender roles of our society, which causes girls to drop out of schools as drought causes food insecurity. In poor households, girls are often seen to be married off at an early age, leading to early pregnancies and, in severe cases, death. People suffering the most physical, sexual, and mental violence during climate-related displacements are also women. So climate justice is largely a feminist issue. And regarding my advocacy, I believe that there can be no climate justice without gender justice. So during my advocacy, I always bring about climate change and gender equality in intersection. For every year of schooling a girl receives, her country's disaster resilience improves. Education also empowers girls for climate leadership. When girls are educated, they can prepare themselves for better jobs, reducing poverty. In schools, they learn about sexual and reproductive health, and spending more years in school also delays pregnancy. And estimates suggest that together with family planning, girls' education has the potential to avoid nearly 85 gigatons of carbon emissions by 2050. So, from all those stats, it has been clearly seen that girls' education and empowerment can be one of the most viable solutions to mitigate the climate crisis. So, the policies of climate change must have gender lens to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Poonam. I think that was summed up really well. Maybe Marinel, you would like to share your thoughts around it?
Yes, thank you so much. And hello again, everybody. I'm Marinel Ubaldo. As mentioned earlier, I am a member of Transform Education, which is hosted by you and Guy, an advocacy officer for ecological justice and youth engagement of Living Law Data sa Philippines. I also would like to acknowledge the representatives we have here from the German government and FCDO. Thank you so much for being present. Your presence is actually very appreciated. So climate justice is actually a feminist issue because as we all know, and as the other speakers, panelists have already shared earlier, girls or women are not yet widely acknowledged to be part of the movement. Though we know that we are one of those that are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis. Yet we are not yet considered, our opinions are not yet considered, especially girls, because they said that women are emotional and they see that as a weakness of women, where in fact they are strength. Those traits of and characteristics of women that they see as weaknesses are actually strength of women, because that makes us being emotional, makes us compassionate, makes us passionate. We understand the situation, we know how to communicate our feelings, and we know how to handle people. Still, there are unequal power relations based on gender, among other things like race, ethnicity, nationality, socioeconomics, and others. So climate change is a complex social issue that should be addressed in an intersectional approach, because there's so many intersectionality in this issue. There are still a lot of things to be done to make sure women are part of the decision-making processes, that are not just being heard, but are actually being considered and are actually getting invited to decision-making tables, and are not just they just put us there to be a decoration, just to say that they're actually listening to us, where in fact they're not. So we have to be part of the process, and in any processes for that matter. At the end, we want an equitable world. We're people of all gender coexist and respect each other, where everyone has a say and everyone is respected for being the person or the gender that we want. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that also is like, very strong statement of, women not just being wanting to, be heard, but also by being part of the process of that entire thing. So thank you. Lygia, would you also like to share your thoughts?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. Well, to begin, it is important to remember that feminists possess a revolution to the structures that subject all people. It is a movement that has been proposed to go against the conception and objectivation of the bodies of women and girls. In this sense, climate change is a serious problem that affects the most marginalized population in the world. And in this chain of effects, women and girls face the worst consequence. As one of the panelists said, worldwide, 70% of people living in poverty are women, which means climate change affects women the most. And in the context of a climate disaster, when housing in the first and the most important area of loss, this creates an existential threat on a different scale for those people in communities whose survival is already precarious. The lack of resources in the countries in poverty, such as Honduras in the Central America region, prevents them from having the capacity to face the effects of climate change, such as hurricanes, earthquakes, and droughts, and having to depend on forage aids. We can see this in specific issues, such as forced displacement due to climate change, thousands of people who leave their homes and hopefully are received in shelters there where they face violence of all kinds, as happened here in Honduras in 2020 with 2 hurricanes, where girls and women spent months in shelters with precarious resources. There were reports of sexual violence, lack of water for menstrual hygiene, among others. In this sense, climate justice is a transversal axis of feminists, since, as I said before, is a cause of inequality and poverty for more women. This leads to unwanted pregnancies, clandestine abortions, maternal mortality. There are other populations doubly or triple discriminated against as women with disability, LGBTQ women, migrants, and those who's with HIV, indigenous women, Afro-descendant, and some to whom all this identity cross them. In itself, there are already structural barriers that prevent them from facing the world with equal opportunities. And so climate change is just another addition to the cause of inequality.
Thank you so much to all the panelists, and I think it's also been well summarized that how it's an intersectional issue, and how poverty and climate justice can really be seen from so many different lenses, which often does not get represented appropriately. So so while we take the discussion forward and have some more reflections from our young panelists, so and I'm seeing some of you are also putting few things in the chat, so we really appreciate that. So we also have each question that has been assigned to our young panelists. So I would like to maybe first reach out to you, Anita, in terms of, and I'm really sorry in case I am mispronouncing the name, so please correct me in that. I would want to understand that, what in your opinion are the root causes of climate catastrophe? Are the root causes at odds with what world leaders really believe? So would you like to maybe share your thoughts around that?
Thank you so much. That's a good question. My first answer would be that we as humans are the first culprits to causing climate catastrophes. We have continued subscribing to our business as usual in our daily lives, and when we see the crisis already in our eyes. But then when you couple this with the way our countries are being run, even makes it worse. We have put profit over the planet, and many leaders have continued to deny the science. Some have not denied the science in words, but in action, when they totally refuse to make key decisions. We see big oil companies building pipelines that are putting thousands of lives in danger. A vivid example is in the East Africa crude oil pipeline, which is going to be the hottest and the longest pipeline, and will lead to a displacement of so many people, so many communities, and it's going to affect their livelihoods. That aside, we all witnessed power imbalances during COP26, where our leaders found it difficult to make decisions for our desired future. Rich countries continue to refuse to do their fair share, turning their backs on the poorest of the world, who are facing many crises, COVID inclusive, rising inequalities, climate apathy. Remember also seeing 138 developing countries representing 5 billion people, whose proposal for a loss and damage finance facility to help deal with the devastating climate impact blocked. There was greenwashing and false solutions during COP26. It was everywhere and everyone could actually see it. All this happened because those who are in power and making these decisions are putting their selfish interest at the forefront and forgetting the poorest of the world, who are hit most by these extremes. Just like all the panelists have also given us an insight on how the vulnerable groups, how girls are affected in cases of extremes. So we are actually forgetting this group of people. We are forgetting the indigenous communities. We are forgetting the rural communities. 90% of the decisions that our leaders make today will cause a climate catastrophe, or to create we can't now create a sustainable future if our decisions are not speaking to what we want to achieve. As citizens, we can also influence decisions by bringing people power at the front lines. We also saw this during COP26, people rising up to the cause. And we could also just vote out the systems that are holding us up. We need to vote with our money, not to support companies that are really, polluting our environment, or companies that are supporting supporting fossil fuels. When it comes to climate change, there is a very urgent need to believe in the science as leaders, as communities, and we should get what works while considering the needs of the vulnerable. And making a decision like this, considering all this, something will happen and we shall prevent a catastrophe for sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts around that. And definitely it's something that we need to really take action on. So the next question that I have is for Poonam. Poonam, so like in the New York Times reported speaking to activists outside COP26 to have crowds of 1 lakh this year, while the members inside the conference were predominantly older male, and the streets were full of youth voices and women, girls. So what in your experience, does the lack of diversity inside indicate?
First of all, the major reason for the disproportionate participation of youth, especially women, during COP26 is due to historical and cultural bias of our society towards women. And globally, political participation of women is very low. Only 1 in 4 parliament members are women. And regarding global ministers, only around 21% of global ministers are women, who are often less favored than their male counterparts in participating high-level political negotiations like COP, like including COP26. That's why it's not that very surprising to see climate delegations always gender imbalanced. And another reason is the underrepresentation of women in research and media. IPCC, which is the biggest influencing body for COP, itself has only around 30% of women authors. And regarding the media, Oxfam report found that gender inequality not only exists in the percentage of news written by women, but also in the number of times women experts and politicians were quoted. And regarding the youth participation, we are expected to have years long of experience to be a government delegate in climate negotiations, which we usually don't possess. That's why it's usually civil society organizations and NGOs which favor young voices and voices of women and girls. So we see youth, women, and girls advocating outside and not making important decisions inside the COP. And what does this lack of diversity in climate negotiations cause? Several issues. Climate science is interdisciplinary, as we all know, because it blends several social, economic, and environmental attributes. So several diverse perspectives are needed to make informed and influential decisions. But due to the current lack of diversity in climate negotiations like COP26, there are very, very much long-term effects. First of all, it seals any opportunity to address injustice and inequality to the people who are mostly affected by climate change, but are not represented enough in climate negotiations. And diverse and inclusive people bring about indigenous knowledge, ideas, and effective problem solving, which ultimately leads to greater chances of success. But due to the current lack of diversity, it will increase the risk for the failure of policies made during climate negotiations. And with more diversity, we can hope that climate agendas can be drafted by the people who are directly experiencing the climate effects, while lack of diversity whitewashes the climate initiatives and which slows down both innovation and action. So there are many problems if there are no diversity in climate negotiations. So diverse leadership and broad representation are essential to mitigate interconnected climate challenges. Because with the current sluggish progress, gender parity in climate leadership is estimated to be achieved only in 2068. That's too far to go, and we can't wait for so long to get our basic rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Poonam. And definitely, I think, like, when we try to understand, so young feminists are, not calling for any kind of technocratic market-based solutions at COP, but, instead, it's more of a demand in terms of, having that intersectional and radical system change so that we're able to address the root causes. So thank you so much. So my next question is to Marinel. So the Secretary General Antonio Guterres noted that there was a climate army outside COP that keeps governments accountable. So who are the actors that undermine accountability, and what is your strategy going forward to address them?
Thank you so much for that question. Well, the actors that I undermine accountability are, I guess, those in power, the businessmen, those who are profiting from the suffering of the communities. And I'm so sad to even say that. People in the frontline communities are basically dying because of the effects of the climate crisis. Yet we are seeing little to no action from the leaders who should have been in the front line of climate action, given the urgency and given that we are in a crisis right now. Moving forward, we have to continue educating the communities on what climate change is. We have to awaken those souls who are still living in the bubble of their comfort zone. We have to localize and to contextualize climate education so people would understand and would be able to relate to it. So when we are talking to farmers community, we have to localize the education so that they will be able to relate. They will be able to know what are the consequences of climate change to their livelihood, to their lives, to their family, and to the communities. We will not be talking about businesses to frontline communities like fishing communities or farming communities. We have to contextualize climate education. So people on the front line, people who don't have that much education, in the Philippines, in the rural areas, fathers, mothers, parents actually weren't able to go to school. And that is not their fault because they didn't have the financial capacity. But it is also the responsibility of the government to make sure that even though they are in that circumstance, they know what is happening in the world. They know what are the issues, and they know that how they could contribute to the solutions. So we have to include how marginalized sectors like women's, elderly, people with disability, children, girls, and others are being disproportionately affected by the climate crisis. There is still, a huge gap in the education sector, failing to realize that people who don't know climate change as a problem or a crisis will not be able to adapt and to mitigate to it beforehand because they didn't know that it is a problem. In the Philippine education, climate change is just in science subject, where in fact it can be discussed in other topics because climate change effects are not just sea level rise. They're not just losing home of the polar bears. They're not just glacial melting. They are not just typhoons, wildfires, and etc. There are also food shortages. There are also minimal livelihood opportunities, deprivation of basic human rights, deprivation of our right to education, to survival, to protection, to development, and all of those basic human rights. People are dying. That is an effect of climate change. There are chronic illnesses. We have a pandemic. There's also mental health. And there's so many still effect of climate change that are not being talked about. So we have to keep engaging with the grassroots communities, and we have to think global but act local. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think they were like really crisp points in terms of like, localizing the education and communication, transforming and involving people who are, majorly impacted, as well as then seeing that, the major thing is to realize the problem also that, it is there and how that can be addressed. So that's very, very important. And thank you. So, Ligya, my question to you is that, what are some feminist demands that youth movements are articulating that are not given enough space inside formal spaces like CSW and COP, and what strategies have they used?
Yes, well, there are a lot of or several demands related to improving the life and dignity of women and girls. For this, there must be very specific actions that seek change in the existing systems and structures in government. Even in the relation of our countries with developing countries, I believe that the measures taken so far become superficial if we consider that they are weak in relation to what some developed countries do in our countries, like extractive actions that impact climate change, poverty, and violence. For the reason, it is requested that the extractive concession cease, that sale of that territory be stopped, and the huge transnational companies stop being exempt from taxes. These issues are mentioned in spaces as COP and CSW, but no concrete actions, I think, are proposed to stop them. Or sometimes at national level, these demands are not materialized in laws or public policies. There is not a monitoring of the implementation of agreements in this of these spaces. Also, is so important to take into account sexual and reproductive health, which also has a high impact on the lives of thousands of girls and women, whether or not they are have access to it. And the significant inclusion of subjects and right holders to those has been invisible. Population that have low levels of education, the structural barriers of low-income countries that place them in situation of extreme poverty along with their family. So some of the demands that I can mention is that women and girls need access to comprehensive sexual education. I think it's a vital issue. We need access to health and contraception. Particularly, I can talk some of my country. In Honduras, we need to access to emergency contraception. I think is that the minimum thing that can be offered when in the shelters or on a migratory route, women and girls are exposed to pregnancy resulting from sexual violence. And here in Honduras, the emergency contraception has been provided since 2009, and we are working in a group, like in an articulated group, in order to have the authorities derogate this agreement. But in the middle, this prohibition is affecting a lot of girls and women. In addition, we demand to stop the criminalization and persecution of women rights defenders, especially defenders of the territory in Guatemala and Honduras. I think it's not possible to continue allowing fundamentalist stances to exercise power in international spaces as COP and CSW, that they have a lot of space in these spaces. And I think one of the strategies that we have used is the articulation for being stronger, because we need to be present in these events, and sometimes it's hard because we need a lot of budget and also the language barrier too. For example, the human rights defenders for the land, they have like less budget to participate in this kind of spaces, and they have like their own languages, and maybe English is not the one of that they can handle. So yes, that from my side.
Thank you so much, Lydia, as well. And I think, that term of exercising power more, with more representation, and, since we have that power with us, so using it more in the right way is very important. So thank you to all our, brilliant panelists for an amazing discussion that we've had. So before we move on to the next step of it, what I really want is that, I would first request our panelists as well to, if you could quickly share, your most important message or ask to world leaders who are attending CSW. Also to our brilliant participants who are here in attendance, like we would also, really request to you all also to, share what key ask or message do you have for world leaders currently attending CSW. I'm also putting this in the chat. So yes, maybe anyone from the panelists wants to share quickly about your share or ask.
I can go first. I would say, dear world leaders, please put the lived realities and solutions initiated and led by girls and young people at the center of decisions that you're making today. It is these solutions that are going to change the status quo. We ask for an investment in the solutions that they're creating. We see that over the years, there are men-dominated solutions because men are taking up these spaces. We need to give girls, young women, youth spaces where they can come in and decide on their future. And we need to also invest in their solutions. For me, that is the most important thing. If we invest in this, then we are sure of the sustainable future. Thank you.
Maybe I can go next. I second your Anita. And today I would also like to demand the world leaders attending CSW to make two major rigid commitments. Firstly, at least 50% of guaranteed participation of women and girls in climate decision making, as well as other social, political, and economic decision making, because everything are interconnected to each other. And secondly, the governments and institutions must increase the investment for the empowerment of women in education, entrepreneurship, and politics. Because we will no longer be consoled with sugar-coated inclusions in papers only. So we demand our voices in both policy making and implementation. We are looking forward to having more policies incorporating gender lens and right-based approach in near future. Thank you.
I can go next. My message to the world leaders who are attending at this CSW, we should work hand in hand, and we should always try to include the grassroots communities, those in the frontline communities. We should stop telling the stories on behalf of them. They should be the one telling their own stories. So we should stop making excuses, because we in the Philippines, in our homes, are losing our loved ones and our communities are sinking. If you don't believe these phenomena are happening, look at our eyes and say climate change is still a future problem, because for us it is not. We have been living by it every day of our lives, and there are still millions of people who are not aware of this crisis, and it is the job of the government, of our leaders, to capacitate them, make sure they are prepared for whatever will come in the future. So
recording in progress from our host organization, International.
Let's work hand in hand together and make a safer world for our children to live. Thank you.
Okay, yes. Well, as represented in this space from the We Live program, I would like to say that young women need have a really power of decision in these spaces where their rights are discussed, especially that women that I have said that are like invisible. Our countries in Latin America, Middle East, and Africa have different issues and contexts, but at the same time, the same problem, that is like the systematic violation of human rights, the constant colonization of our lands and bodies, and the influence of fundamentalists that reproduce hate and discrimination. So I think they need to have this in their mind when they are like discussing our human rights, because in our context, I mean, we have this document that say a lot of things, maybe some good things, but in our countries that is like not the materializing. So we need to have more power of this in these spaces. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you. And I think it's been really nice to understand how do we see, making these demands and these, challenges that we have, and how we can really see them turn into action. So I think that has been a good discussion around that, like how can that also be put into action. So thank you once again to our brilliant panelists. I would now like to request if my colleague Prim is here to take us on with our next session.
Thanks, Puvi, and thanks everyone. My name is Primrose Manyalo. I work with Restless Development. So we thought we could also use this opportunity to look forward and bring all of you who are in the room into the discussion as well. So we have a Jamboard. I'll just ask my colleague Mufida to share her screen and show the Jamboard, as well as share the link, because we have 3 questions for you, and hopefully we can respond to these 3 questions in the next 10 minutes. So, and the first question is, we all know that COP27 is around the corner. What opportunities and priorities do you see, both inside the formal spaces and outside, that would deliver, the change, the intersectional and radical systems change that we want addressed, to address the roots of inequality? So you can just add a stick note and add your thoughts now, and I'll be reading them out as you share them. And in case you cannot access the Jamboard, I think we can also just copy and paste the question in the chat. So this is an opportunity for you guys to also share your thoughts in this Jamboard. So what do the opportunities COP27 present, both inside COP27 and outside COP27, to address, inequality?
I just want to highlight how to use it. There's on the side, you can pick the sticky note option and just add one and write in it, and you save it, and it will be added automatically.
So I see a response. I've also just cut and pasted the question in the chat in case you're not able to access, Jamboard. More participation of youth, women, and indigenous groups. So participation of diverse groups of women. What else? Don't worry if you can't use the Jamboard, you can also just type your responses in the chat. More investments in education and economic upliftment of people in LDCs. Thank you. Acknowledging that meaningful inclusion involves a true transference of power. Without this engagement of young folks, especially minority groups, it remains tokenistic. Inclusive spaces, prioritize and fund gender and transformative climate education. COP27 leaders invite WEDO and other feminist groups into planning processes. If you could also write what WEDO is in full, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you for those responses. Please do keep them coming. Yeah, let me check the chat to see what the chat box is saying in case we have any more responses there. No, we don't. We just have on the Jamboard, which is great. Yeah, I think, Mufida, we can move on to the next slide, the next frame on Jamboard to tackle the second question. Are you hopeful for what can be achieved at COP27? Please justify your answer. If you are hopeful, give us the reason. If you're not hopeful, also give us the response. That's the second question. I'll also type it in the chat box. Are you hopeful for what can be achieved at COP27? It can be a yes, no answer, maybe, and then a reason for it. I am optimistic as the youth and women and girls are becoming increasingly aware of our rights, but countries and institutions must invest more knowledge and funds for this drastic change. Thank you for that. Any other perspective? Do you feel hopeful or not, and why? It's 50-50 for me because of all the backtracking and non-compliance on resolutions from previous conference governments. We can have more actionable discussions and points from COP27. So it creates, you know, this platform to come up with actions and discussion points and platforms to discuss. Yeah. Anything else? Anything else? Let me also just check the chat. Nothing in the chat. Okay. Cool. Okay. And then we have a final question. I think there's just one more response before we go to the final question, which is saying that I find it difficult to be hopeful, given that countries have continued to ignore the IPCC warning. So there are mixed feelings about how our audience in this room feels about COP27 and what can be achieved at COP27. Our final question is, what actions will you be taking, either inside or outside COP and CSW spaces, to achieve climate justice? What kind of actions will you be taking? Perhaps this needs to say climate and gender justice. Raising awareness. Okay. well. What else will you be doing? Climate, gender, and education activists and feminists in the room. What contribution will you be making to the climate and gender justice cause? Educate girls, permaculture education. Okay, cool. Planning for the for entrepreneurship ideas for the people suffering from climate crisis, to raise awareness to my local community and act to help with climate justice. Thank you very much for these perspectives. Please keep them coming. We will make this Jamboard accessible to you after this call, so you can always also just input after, you know, after the session. But I'll hand back over to Pulvi to invite our government representatives that joined us today to make responses to some of the issues that you guys actually raised today.
Thank you so much, Primrose, and also thank you everyone who were able to participate in our Jamboard session. So I would now really, when we move forward, but first of all, thank our government representatives as well. And we have some questions for you all as well, which will be really nice to hear from you on your thoughts and, how do you want to take this forward. So we have, we have Laura with us. And my first question to you is that as the Dutch Youth Ambassador, what role have you been playing to link young people and policymakers? And since you also heard other young climate change and reproductive justice feminist activists today, how do you plan to continue aligning the work of the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs to the diverse group of young people?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a great session and it's amazing to see all these young feminists sharing their opinions. As Youth Ambassador, it is my job to make sure that the lived realities of young people align with the foreign policies of the Netherlands. I do this by advising the ministry on their policies, but I also try to have monthly youth consultations with young people from all over the world. During these youth consultations, I ask young people about the challenges they are facing concerning sexual and reproductive health and rights, gender equality and bodily autonomy, and what they think should change. Young girls from countries like Kenya and South Sudan told me that period poverty and the myths around periods have a huge effect on their lives. For example, some believe that a girl should not have her second period in her parents' house. This means that she has to marry quickly after her first menstruation. Not being able to afford menstrual products or not having the facilities to change her menstrual products is also one of the main reasons why girls in low-income countries stop going to school. Conflict situations and climate crisis makes this only worse because it is then even harder to get access to menstrual products. The young people I talk to also frequently highlight the importance of comprehensive sexuality education, since access to information or sex education is very rare and not something young people speak with their parents or family about, whilst there is a big demand for information concerning sex, sexuality, and sexual health. To give an idea, the term sex is the most Googled term in Sri Lanka. CSE is a very helpful tool for young people since it can prevent child marriage and help young girls to understand their sexual rights, which also decrease school dropout and unwanted pregnancies. However, in conflict, crisis, and extreme climate events, we've seen that CSE is not seen as a priority because people have to worry about shelter, food, water, and energy sources. When infrastructure is disintegrated due to extreme climate events or climate change, SRHR services are also not available, which mostly impacts young women and girls. Climate change is thus not a gender-neutral phenomenon, as it disproportionately impacts women and girls due to pre-existing gender inequalities that are perpetuated by social practices and structures. I will thus use the input from the young feminists from this event and the input from young people during the youth consultations to advise the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on their policies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that looks and sounds really interesting and promising. So thank you for that. So we also have Camelia Pankhurst with us, who is an education advisor, Global Funds and Climate and Environment, Girls Education Department, Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. So my question to you is that, as you know, as part of the final words, can you share to respond to the issues you have heard from climate education and reproductive justice feminists today? And what are you already doing and what do you commit to do to help address issues raised by young people in the session today?
Thanks so much, Purvi, and just thanks so much for having me. This has been a fantastic opportunity for me to hear firsthand from young activists, and it's been both really sobering to be reminded of the real-world impacts of climate change in your communities, and thanks, yeah, honestly, so much for your heartfelt testimonies, but also really inspiring to hear about all the action being taken, both from the panelists, but also all the links in the chat, and I hope the chat will be available afterwards to be able to delve into that a bit more. And kudos to Restless and Ungai and other organisers for the format of the event. I think it's worked really well in terms of hearing from young women. That's the most important thing. And I'm very happy to have the sort of graveyard slot at the end of the session. So yeah, Juanita, Poonam and Marinel made the case for girls' education and empowerment as a solution to climate change much better than I could, so I won't try and repeat. But I am always particularly struck and was reminded by the panelists by three things. So the first is that point around intersectionality in the context of climate change. You know, violence, education, health, nutrition, displacement, poverty, all of these things really come together, and women and girls are the ones who are most badly affected. And it really is the case that the only way to address these interconnected issues is by putting women and girls at the heart of our response. But it's of course not easy to do. So it's good to be reminded constantly by the importance of that. The second thing that I'm always struck by is that enormous potential of women in positions of power, whether in politics or business. You know, there's really strong evidence that where countries have more women in parliament, in positions of political power, they are better in terms of their environmental income. And Poonam's stat on gender parity and climate negotiations not happening until 2068 is hugely concerning in that context. And Poonam, like, kudos for how you use stats in your presentation. I thought that was really powerful. And then the third thing, just to pick up on from what our panelists said, is that piece around the kind of lesser talked about impacts of climate change and the urgency. And Marinel, you made this case really strongly that there's always a temptation to talk about this as a future problem, but it really is a reality for millions now. So I think that's just a really crucial reminder to all of us who are sitting in positions of power in government organizations. So thank you hugely for your time and your reflections and your action. You're very inspiring young women. And maybe just to say a kind of my main reflection and response in terms of what I'm doing and what I'm going to do. So as Purvi said, I'm an education advisor at the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And I'm the policy lead here for the links between education and climate change. And I can honestly say that 2021 and particularly COP26 was a real wake-up call for us. And I think for the wider education community as well on these links, and the need for us to really change how we're working in education. So I was really pleased that at COP, some of you may have seen that for the first time, education and environment ministers came together to discuss the impacts of climate change on education and the positive potential which educated populations represent in terms of climate resilience, adaptation and mitigation. And there are about 25 countries that made pledges to empower young people to be agents of change through education and learning. But meanwhile, that's great. It's obviously not enough. And I think the strong message from this session has been, for all the good things that happened at COP, there's much more to do. And in terms of education, it's really clear that the impacts of climate change are dramatic and happening now. You know, 40 million children a year have their education impacted by extreme weather events alone, and that's only getting worse. We know this affects girls more than boys, and it's another barrier to girls getting a quality education. And of course, all of that is in a context of a learning crisis, which sits alongside the climate crisis, where 9 out of 10 children in low-income countries can't read by the age of 10, and that was even before COVID and school closures. These crises are obviously really interconnected, so I think the question is what to do about it. And just briefly to say that what we are doing about it at FCDO is spending the year developing our policy position on these links. I know that sounds really blah, 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 but it's how things work here at FCDO in terms of we have to set out what the evidence is, what we think, and therefore what we should do. And it's only then that we can really mobilize across all of the countries that we work in, using both our aid programs and our relationships with governments to make the changes needed. And I do really believe that, as has been raised today, education and empowerment of girls and women is central to all of our ambitions for climate justice and feminist justice. So I do feel really excited about the work and the opportunity. So thank you so much. The event's perfect timing, plenty of the food for thought to take into development of that policy, and just to say thanks again for all of your insights and challenge and for having me.
Thank you so much. And I think, yes, all of this will really lead to actionable efforts. So thank you for sharing your thoughts as well around that, Camelia. So we also have Dr. Kirsten Echternach with us, who is also a Senior Policy Officer, Education Division, Germany. Dr. Kirsten, my question to you is also the same, like in terms of your final words, if you could share and respond to the issues you have heard till now from climate education and reproductive justice feminists, and what are you already doing and what do you commit to do to help address issues that have been raised by young people in the session today?
Thank you. Thank you for this inspiring event today. I would like to give my special thanks to the speakers who have offered the perspective on feminist aspirations for climate justice. I'm impressed by your work and encourage you to continue to push for transformative change and to establish and use feminist networks. Your views and expertise are needed in today's world. I would also like to thank my government colleagues from the Netherlands and the UK, our moderator, Ungai, Restless Development, and the other organization for realizing this event, and of course, everyone listening today. I'm sure we have all learned a lot today. I know that I have. And I want to reiterate the importance of diverse and intersectional approaches. As you know, Germany is strongly committed to a feminist development policy. Advancing gender equality and girls' education through our multilateral partnerships is a cornerstone in this endeavor. Crises, whether they are environmental or climate disasters, violent conflicts or pandemics, have a negative impact on children and young people's school attendance and learning outcomes. Girls are disproportionately impacted, but girls can also become important actors for change. Due to common gender-specific roles, women and girls are important knowledge bearers. Therefore, we need to support their full, equal, and meaningful participation and include them in decision-making processes so they can include their knowledge and perspectives when it comes to climate action and adaptation to the impacts of climate change. As we are all deeply aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated existing gender-based inequalities in education. We observe an increase in gender-based violence, such as FGM, and also in child marriages and teenage pregnancies. Having said that, education offers tremendous opportunities. Education helps children to take an active role in society, to know their rights, including their sexual and reproductive rights, to combat and adapt to climate change, to create a more resilient and sustainable world. Hence, Germany is committed to reach the children most left behind, and especially to further girls' education. In May 2021, we have launched the Support Her Education Initiative, SHE, and pledged 100 million euros for the years 2021 to 2024 to the GPE Girls Education Accelerator to get girls back to learning after the global school closures caused by the pandemic. Also, we continue to be a closer partner of Ungai and the Gender at the Center initiative. Finally, I would like to highlight that BMZ Germany established a Youth Advisory Council last year to strengthening youth participation in German development cooperation and to include young voices in the decision-making tables. The Council is actively working on issues that affect youth, especially education and climate justice. Together, we can go far. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And like, it's really nice to know the commitments that Germany already has and are working on. So thank you to all our young panelists and even the government representatives. So we really thank each one of you for taking out the time, and also thanking our participants to continuously being there and responding on the questions and sharing your own feedback and ask that we could have from the the people who are attending CSW. So thank you so much once again, everyone. And before we part and before we close this event, but like not close on the actions, I would also like to request all of you, like in case you have not come across and would be interested. So Restless Development also is working on a youth collective which is live, and you can look out for any of the upcoming leadership lab opportunities also. And youth collective is also it's a opportunity where different organizations are there working together, and it's more of like how can we all work together rather than in silos. And you could also subscribe to Restless Development's newsletters. So thank you so much everyone for attending. And yeah, so the link has been shared by Prim. Yeah, and once again, really thank you to all of you for staying connected and also sharing on your thoughts, your asks, and how do you see action being taken.
Bye. Thank you.